Who wins in the fight against extremism, like any other conflict, comes down to resources. Who wins, the extremists or us? It comes down to who has the money, the infrastructure, and the power and influence to overwhelm the other side. Over the last decade, we've seen how well-resourced extremists can impose their ideology on all of us. And if that makes you think of the billionaire class, people like Elon Musk, that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about an ecosystem that's much bigger than the world's richest man. The policies that have shocked most Americans during the first and second Trump terms, especially those driven by Stephen Miller, they didn't come out of nowhere. They didn't surprise people like me. They didn't surprise my guest today. Because these ideas have been circulating for years, shopped, refined, and pushed from the fringe into the mainstream by what are effectively white nationalist think tanks operating in plain sight, backed by millions in dark money. One of those organizations is called VDARE. They're a group that has spent decades promoting anti-immigrant conspiracy theories and building a bridge between the white nationalist fringe and the halls of power. During the first Trump presidency, especially after Charlottesville, there was a massive pushback against the so-called alt-right. After Heather Heyer was murdered, after the country saw swastikas and Confederate flags in the streets while white supremacists used brutal violence against people of color, clergy, and women on camera, it became much harder for these groups to operate openly in places like Washington, D.C. So they adapted. In 2020, VDARE spent over $1 million to buy a castle overlooking the quaint small town of Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, close enough to the nation's capital to stay connected to power and to host other extremist groups who were in town, but far enough away to operate without facing a lot of organized resistance. That's what resources look like on their side. But when I talk about resources in the fight against extremism, I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about time, energy, attention, health, well-being, the finite resources that human beings only have so much of. Because the people pushing back, the researchers, the journalists, the community members, are often doing it underpaid, if paid at all, without the support that they need, and at real personal cost. My friend Michael Edison Hayden is one of those people. Mike is an investigative reporter and someone whose work has helped me to understand the extremist ecosystem. As a reporter, he broke some of the biggest stories on the radical right over the last decade, and his analyses, featured in outlets like NPR, MSNBC, and CNN, helped shape perspectives on the authoritarian anti-democracy movement that took over the Republican Party. In his new book, Strange People on the Hill, he tells the story about what happened in Berkeley Springs when VDARE moved in and what it cost the people who stood up to it. He also writes about what I think of as the toxic nonprofit industrial complex, how large institutions that claim to be on the front lines of this fight can treat their own researchers and journalists as expendable or even as enemies from within. This is a story about one small town and the cost of actually fighting extremism. It's also a national story about, as Mike writes, the psychological and emotional environment that birthed the second Trump presidency. And finally, it's also a personal story. As you'll hear in this episode, Mike and I went through a lot of the same things at the same time. And that includes some pretty serious mental health crises. But while we talk about the costs that we've paid, we also talk about how the light that we've shown on these extremist organizations has cost them so much more. And that's why, no matter the cost, we keep going on offense. Michael Edison Hayden, newly published author of Strange People on the Hill. You're someone who exists in a small world that I've been a part of for a little while. folks like to call me the Nazi hunter, but you were doing this for a long time before I even dipped my toes into it. So it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I'm really excited to talk about your book. And you know what, as I'm reading this, the thing that strikes me is you and I were going through a lot of the same things at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people in this small field of experts in OSINT and research on extremism, like we were all kind of going through it to some extent. So we're going to call you Mike because Michael Edison Hayden.
My friends call me Mike. I consider you a friend, Kris. So
awesome. So what is it that prompted you to sit down and get out your thoughts? You're a journalist. You do some investigative reporting, not short pieces by any means. They're certainly not something that you're start and finish in a day. What made you decide to write this book? Yeah.
Well, I think we're all of us, certainly people in this audience, because if you think about fascism and sort of the you know, kind of the friend-enemy distinction of it, right? So, you know, all of them, meaning fascist people who are aligned with that ideology, they're all on one side of things. And the rest of us are all kind of suffering through this in many ways, right? Because there's either the options are to join them, right? Or to live through this and try to survive this moment. And I felt like Berkeley Springs, what is happening in Berkeley Springs was such a perfect for literary purposes, such a perfect symbol of what we're all kind of going through, right? Where there's this town, everybody's living, they're going about their business, and then one day there is this tremendous fascist force pushing down on them from above. It's just a perfect bit of symbolism. And just for people who don't know what the story we're talking about here, this is a town of about 700 to 1,000 people based upon estimates in Morgan County, West Virginia. It's 90% white and obviously in a deep red part of the country in Appalachia. And VDARE, who is an SPLC designated white nationalist group, right? I would say better than white nationalist as a term to understand it. If you're familiar with the Great Replacement narrative, which I know you are, which is this idea that whites are being, genocided in their own countries through non-white immigration, just they're being replaced by non-white people. That's the best way to understand what VDARE does. They from 1999 till now, were arguably the leading nonprofit in pushing that into the Republican Party. They buy this beautiful castle. It's gorgeous. It should be a national park, and it sits on top of this hill, and underneath is Berkeley Springs. And the short thing as to why write about it, why focus on this little town, is because the divisions that erupt in the town, the pain that erupts in the town, the pain that I go through in the book, all that stuff I think speaks to what everybody in your audience is feeling in this moment where you turn on the news in the morning and you're like, Jesus Christ, another thing, right? Another thing is bearing down on me. Another thing is happening. And that has happened to these folks to a much more amplified degree because of this group.
As I was reading your book, I kind of started to feel like, because you write about 2020, and as you're going down to this white nationalist castle now, the pandemic is kicking off. And I'm starting to realize how I used to say and think that like a lot of people have memory hold the pandemic, but as I'm reading your words, because you wrote it, while it was fresh in your mind, I'm starting to realize that I kind of memory hold it. And I kind of, and that's actually when I started infiltrating extremist organizations. I went from, researcher into foreign threats to joining a neo-Nazi organization with a friend kind of on a fucking whim, which was a weird thing to do. The pandemic was a weird time. How do you think the desperation, the fear that people were feeling in that town and nationally during the pandemic impacted the way that they responded to this white nationalist group buying a huge castle in their town?
Well, I think the first part, because just to divide up what you asked there, I think that we would not have Trump 2, which is a different phenomenon from Trump 1, which was still kind of tethered in some ways, despite all the like sort of neo-fascist elements around Trump in the first term. Mm-hmm. I don't think we would have this much more overtly authoritarian thing, the violence in Minneapolis and all that, if it were not for the pandemic and the anxiety that created. I mean, it really kicked up just a tremendous amount of anxiety in the country around your mortality, just being alive, being a human being, seeing people, that death ticker, right? And then the denial of death that followed, if you recall, right? Then it was like in the blowback. It had a profoundly traumatic impact on people's lives. Mm-hmm. So again, going back to the microcosm, because I feel like the town is such a great symbol of what everybody is doing, right? All of a sudden, the local businesses, which are so reliant on tourist dollars in Berkeley Springs, they have a double whammy. Not only are they dealing with an SPLC designated white nationalist group that has a very negative reputation publicly, that's steering away business, but also nobody's visiting because of the pandemic. Nobody's going because of the pandemic. All they have is each other, and they're really turning on one another at that time. And I think that we see that, we absolutely see that nationally. It's just the way we turned on one another at that time, right? All the silly stuff that people used to laugh about Fauci. People were taking that really, really, really seriously on the right. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the reason why it's so much easier to forget, where it's just sort of like, what even was that moment? But it was, I think it had a profound effect at exacerbating existing divisions. Not so much that it created divisions, but imagine like a wound there and then just pulling it apart because of all these fear of death and denial of death that was going on both sides.
Throughout the book, you write about your conflict at SPLC, the way that this organization with hundreds of millions of dollars was no longer seeming to support its core mission of defending civil rights. The intelligence project that you were a part of lost Heidi Beirich before the period that you start writing about. And you write that you felt like you and Hannah and other people studying extremism and exposing it and imposing costs on these extremists by bringing to light their misdeeds and their criminality, that you were children trying to parent yourselves.
Yes. Yeah, that's the way we described it. It went through a few phases. So for people who don't, who just only passively know about Southern Poverty Law Center, and I don't take for granted that everyone even knows what the organization is or does, but it's like one of the leading civil rights organizations in the country. It was founded in 1971 by a guy named Morris Dees. You'll see if you watch enough MS Now, you'll come across these ads for the SPLC, and it'll be like, people singing "We Shall Overcome," and there's a lot of imagery around the civil rights movement. The organization wasn't founded until 1971, so a lot of that stuff had already happened. I'm not saying that they're like a fraud organization for that reason, but that is it is more branding than reality there. The main thing that made the SPLC a force to be reckoned with and made it loathed on the right was the Intelligence Project. It was built in 1981, and defined really by Heidi Barrick, who is just a phenomenal researcher and investigative reporter and outspoken voice against fascism. And that is where you get all the like tracking and labeling and hate map type of stuff. That all comes from them. And the founder of the SPLC, Morris Dees, was pushed out for accusations of sexually inappropriate behavior, other things. In I guess 2019, that's where it was. I was there. I think it was March 2019, and he's pushed out, and a lot of people resigned. And Heidi was burned out. She was not caught up in any of that stuff, but she was burned out and tired, and so she wanted to leave. And when she left, and the founder left, it was, just a lot of middle managers with no leadership at the time. So when we first got a message from Paul Johansson in Berkeley Springs saying like, hey, can anyone help this SPLC designated white nationalist group? VDARE has bought a castle in the town. And when I say it's bought a castle, for people who don't know, this castle rocks. It's so beautiful. It's just a gorgeous castle. And I should also add, I think it's important for your audience to know, this is what I mentioned is a tourist town. They are reliant on not people from Morgan County, West Virginia, but people from Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia. Cities are predominantly liberal, more diverse than the rest of, than West Virginia is, for example. And gay couples in West Virginia, for instance, go for weekends, right? They're there. It may be a deep red state, but they live there. That's their home. And they'll go for a weekend in Berkeley Springs. Is considered a more welcoming place. I mention that because the economy of the place is really driven by those tourist dollars. This is a place where people go hiking, bike riding, this type of thing. So Paul and his wife own a coffee shop at that time called Fairfax Coffee House. It's still there. It's beautiful. Everybody should go grab a cup of coffee off of Route 522 sometime. And he emails the SPLC and is like, hey, this SPLC designated white nationalist group has just bought this castle that is a big symbol. That's our biggest landmark of all Morgan County. Can someone help? What can we do? Now, there's really nothing you can do when you get that call, right? What can you do? It was purchased privately. It should be a national park or something, but it was a private building. And Lydia Brimlow, who is the wife of Peter Brimlow from VDARE, purchased it on Zillow. So this castle's like $1.4 million on Zillow. He emails us, Paul, and without anyone to guide us, my editor, who's actually much younger than I am and everything, she's like, this is what we do. You need to go speak to these people. And that's what started it. I mentioned that, I want to emphasize that because the original question was about the SPLC. I'm not sure the SPLC would have sent anyone for this later.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're getting to. It just happened to be this vacuum of power where they just, you should go. Someone should go talk to these people. So we set it up. I went to go talk to him. You wouldn't believe, Kris, the faces of these people, how sad they were. They're so profoundly sad because it's not just, okay, now the town is associated with racism. It's also, and they themselves don't want to be racist, but there's the other basic factor of they feed their families selling knickknacks in this store and crafts, selling coffee to people who come on a weekend, selling, a Mexican restaurant in town. They rely on people visiting the town to sell. And that's where I made a promise to keep Trey Johansson, her, the wife of Paul, to keep coming back if I could. But that became harder as the SPLC became much more reluctant to take on risk. And that has become a predominant theme of that organization, the same organization that warned of a fascist reality, of the kind of right-wing authoritarian movement taking power that is taking power in this country today. At the moment it happened, has really slid back. So this, I think the book, last thing, I'm going to pass it back to you, captures both the last moment when that would have been possible and the aftermath of, pressure from scared liberal organizations, liberal leaders, to kind of back away from Trump and MAGA at a time when people are really at their most frightened.
Yeah, what you experienced with SPLC, I think, is a pretty broad phenomenon. During the Biden presidency, I feel like a lot of civil rights organizations, progressive, left-leaning organizations, ones that spent years saying we're defending democracy, suing Donald Trump, and fighting to expose these Nazis and stuff. They all seem to pull back. I leading Task Force Butler Institute, I had an organization that never found funding. We never had enough funding for staff. We're wildly effective for an all-volunteer organization.
Definitely were.
But, at the end of the day, you and I are human beings surrounding ourselves in the ugliest things imaginable all day, every day, and the support doesn't exist. Can you talk about in the book about how the SPLC offered you things like an online subscription for mental health, and the mental health professionals that you met with were kind of dumbfounded when you spoke to them about what you did for a living, and they were just like, "Oh, that sounds terrible," and didn't have much to offer for you. What is the answer there?
Yeah, that's a good question. The SPLC was not prepared for what we were dealing with, and we're in total denial of what we're dealing with in reporting on this stuff. I know you've gotten death threats and all kinds of things, from people. Death threats don't necessarily I think it can be a mistake to think of death threats in terms of simply, hopefully, no one takes action on this, and make sure you're secure, you don't get killed or something. I'm not even worried about that when I hear people getting death threats, because, really speaking, very few people are, being targeted at that level. Some people get a door knock, or they get something. My parents got something from Patriot Front in the mail once. That stuff happens. But I had in 2018, I had 3 police reports in 3 different jurisdictions. One was where my family lived, one where my parents lived, and one where my office was in Manhattan, as an idea. And the impact that constant death threats have on you is a psychological one. It has to do with it has to do with how you see yourself, and imagine, you cannot help but imagine being killed. I used to have all the time kind of flashes when it was at their worst of imagining someone, boom, shooting me from the back of the head or something like that. Because I was getting things like, don't go to work tomorrow. You're going to get, it was every day I had to report something to someone else about it. To be like, hey, just FYI, tell your colleagues not to go to work today. This was when I was working at Newsweek, because they're, you're going to get killed in this thing, and you don't want them to get killed too. The impact of that over time is you feel like you're walking around, or at least I did, with a rain cloud over your head. I don't know, it's the sort of Peanuts kind of thing where Charlie Brown is walking. That's the way it felt. I mean, I felt really almost haunted, where it's just everybody else is, everyone else is sitting around. We're watching a movie together. They're in that, and part of your head is still in that thing of hey, somebody wants to take me out really bad, because they keep mentioning to me all the time through all these different phone numbers and socks and things like that. SPLC was just okay, we're selling the civil rights movement to people, Nobody ever really thought about it. We were given a subscription to an app. I'm sure the app is fine for some people, and maybe you get lucky with the right therapist and stuff like that. But they had no context. They had no context to understand what we were going through. And that goes beyond just being exposed to a lot of hate, right? Like if you're exposed to a lot of hate, a lot of swastikas and stuff like that, that's a lot for the average person. I don't really think that was too much for me. I can handle it. I have a strong resistance, otherwise I wouldn't get into it. But if you can just think about yourself in terms of your mortality every day and someone taking you out and stuff like that, I mean, that can really, really wear on you. You know, we can go to future questions and stuff like that, but eventually there was a breaking point for me where there are multiple stressors, and I just did not do well after that.
Well, what you're describing is PTSD, right? A lot of people think about post-traumatic stress disorder, especially when it comes to veterans, as like there was this IED, or you watched your friend get shot or whatever. Like there was this one incident, there was this one moment, which is what gets the airtime because it's sexy, right? In the same way that if it bleeds, it leads. It's what people pay attention to.
You can fit it into a little short story.
But I think from my experience, it's not fear. Fear's not the right word. I wasn't constantly afraid when I was in Iraq, but I was constantly aware of the fact that this could be the last day. This could be the last time I get in this truck. This
Absolutely.
could be the last time I get out at this Red Crescent.
Yep.
And I think that there is a lack of understanding from my experience with the funders and with the executives in this nonprofit space, which is unfortunately, the only way that anyone gets paid to do this kind of work.
It's the infrastructure as it exists.
Yeah. Do you think that there is a way to convince funders and the executives at these organizations of the human toll, of the human cost on the researchers in a way that doesn't scare them into quitting? It kind of feels like SPLC was scared into quitting with the intelligence project, and they consider people like you a liability, and the cost that you bear, they consider you a liability for that. Is there a way to fix that, or do we have to start operating more like VDARE, where we have anonymous benefactors? Is that how our side has to fix this problem?
You're raising really difficult questions here. I should note that the workers inside the SPLC have not quit, many of them. Hannah Gase was one example, but I know Rachel Fugardi, who works on, just male supremacist stuff and incels or whatever. She does great work. For example, Jeff Tischhauser is really like tough as leather, does a lot of white nationalist type of thing. He's all over Patriot Front and those guys. I think at the executive level, when they are confronted with what this actually is, their first inclination is to back away and hide. Mm-hmm. They don't want to do it. And they also, I think there is a kind of, for lack of a better word, envy of the people who are doing it at that level and what they're going through, because they want to, they think of the, part of getting in this space to begin with is even the executives, they think that they're out there saving the world, and they want to think that they're the ones like out there, fighting for all this justice and stuff like that. And when the people who are actually bloodied from it, metaphorically, come to them and be like, I need a bandage for this. They're like, there's some resentment, I think, for the fact that like these are the people actually doing it. So this is a complicated thing. I don't want to be totally negative there and say, that's the case. But I do think at some point, solidarity, a union almost of people who do this stuff need to confront these organizations and about the reality of the threat that they're facing personally, and say that like there should be a standardization of how, once you are doing this kind of work, how you are treated and how you should be expected to be treated. Nobody's doing this to get rich or anything like that. And like my book is not, for example, just a good gesture to the civil rights movement. It's supposed to be enjoyed as literature. It's my, that's that. But the work I was doing with the SPLC, for example, that's different. That, that was work that needed a stronger hand of protection. And because it was day in, day out. I mean, they knew what I was going through, and they kind of, they kind of got almost frustrated with having to consider it. Right. Mm-hmm. It would be like, oh, this could be a liability for our brand if these threats continue or whatever. We got to worry about like, how is this going to look, et cetera, if you're sort of at war with a white supremacist, or you look like you're fighting them, on online or something. That was a problem. That was a real problem. And I know I had it very bad. Because I was also a spokesperson. So I was like in the public eye a lot, and that made it be more dangerous for me. But everybody I know has dealt with something, and it would be wrong of me to not mention here that women go through it in a very particular way, right? Because there's also a lot of threats of sexual violence and stuff like that. That impacts how they see themselves. Mm-hmm. That impacts the way they think about the world. It impacts the way they may be able to relate to other people, to be able to relate to men if they're attracted to men. It's difficult to be out there and reporting and like constantly being threatened with rape, which happens to a lot of women on this beat. So yeah, it's a big deal.
So we've both experienced these institutions kind of folding recently. And you and I have talked about our personal experiences, our price that we have had to pay for that. What do you think the American society has experienced more broadly because of these kinds of failures? And, to get outside of the small world of extremism researchers, there's the law firms that have, preemptively made deals with the Trump administration so that they wouldn't get harassed.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
That was the thing.
So what do you think America has gone through as a result of all of these capitulations?
A lot. A lot. To put it mildly, I think there are different levels. I don't want to, I just want to point out that like I'm saying some really negative things about like executive class people in this thing. I want to say that it's also not easy for literally anybody to figure out what to do. And there are some very well-meaning people who might hear this and be like, well, yeah, you should have gotten more support. And, my organization would have wanted to do that for you. Or there are good people all over this stuff, they're not fascists, right? Mm-hmm. That being said, there are more egregious people than others, and there are people who collaborate with fascists, or people who apologize for them. And I always think of the ADL, for example. It's very easy to be overwhelmed right now and to try not be able to know what to do. The purchase of X by Elon Musk, we can't even put our words around it now. Maybe when I'm 25 years from now, if I'm still kicking around, I will do a book about what happened during that transition, because it was such an important transformation, like culturally. All of a sudden, like all these, elevating on the For You tab, all this extremist element at once. It was like the scene in Ghostbusters where they like opened the containment vault. Mm-hmm. And like everything, right? It's like all these guys. It's like, I didn't even see this guy in 5 years, and all of a sudden he's like trending on this website. That's overwhelming. How do you even get your hands around it? It's like we see like the word, for instance, goyslop, right? Where you see that like that guy James Fishback using that word. There's like a sort of, it's such a deep cut anti-Semitic thing that is now like being said on TV because of Republican politicians. X had a profound thing in shifting towards that. I mentioned that in the context of like the ADL, who, whose first instinct when Elon Musk did that gesture, the Roman salute, that he says it wasn't a Roman salute. I should note that's what he says. But
My heart goes out to you.
Their first instinct was to apologize for him.
Yeah.
Right? Their first instinct was when Mahmoud Khalil was apprehended by the Trump administration, which was completely illegal. Thank God justice prevailed there. But I mean, how, is anyone going to point out to them, how embarrassing it looks that their first instinct was like, we encourage this totally illegal action on this guy who happened to have a different opinion than we did about Palestine. So there are different levels of egregiousness and different level. There are people who don't know what to do in this moment. The SPLC went into shutdown mode. Mm-hmm. And then there's that which to me cannot be forgotten about that organization, that they took those steps. That to me is a profound betrayal, I think, of the civil rights community.
I think that the things that you're talking about right now broke my spirit in a way that the bad guys never could.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you about that. Yeah.
Going from the pandemic of everybody, every rational person afraid that they could get sick, that someone in their family could die, and it did happen to a lot of us, to go from that to, as a veteran, the fall of Afghanistan and trying to evacuate people desperately, to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and watching American politicians stand alongside the Russians, stand alongside Putin and say all Ukrainians are Nazis.
Yeah.
Like, you motherfuckers don't care about Nazis. Yeah. Why are they a problem in Ukraine right now?
Yeah.
Anyway, we could talk about the Azov Battalion another time. But then we went to, the attack against Israel and then the genocide in Gaza.
Yes.
And we watched organizations like the ADL turn on its head in a way that I think was different from its previous behavior. They got much more aggressive in calling for the removal of civil rights of peaceful activists.
Yeah.
And I'm a graduate of Columbia University, and I only graduated in 2020 during the pandemic, which sucked. And watching my own campus, where I used to live, Jonathan Greenblatt going down and calling for American troops to be dispatched against students.
Yes.
Was more psychologically harmful to me than any neo-Nazi death threat that ever made it my way.
Yeah, because it really shows. I mean, this is a guy with a tremendous amount of power in our world, ostensibly. I think there's a bit of a realignment happening here. I don't think people are considering the ADL a liberal organization anymore because of some of this stuff. But it's a profound betrayal, and it makes you feel like there's no leadership on our side when you see the leaders doing that. And it's horrible. And another thing that is it's not the most horrific thing that's happened in the last few years. There's been a lot of different things, but there's been some really, really bad reporting in like the New York Times and stuff like that about Nick Fuentes and figures like that, where these figures are being soft pedaled. Mm-hmm. And that's another, where, the way it's being framed is just sort of like, well, okay, this is accepting the reality that X created about who's important and who's not, to some extent, with a little bit of mention of like, oh yeah, there's some racist stuff here for sure, Whereas in reality, it's like, yeah, this guy was a fringe live streamer who has become who he is largely because of these algorithms and because of organizations like the New York Times, unwilling to publish stuff that would dig deeper to hurt him. I remember recently there's an article about the looks-maxing clavicular. Braden Peters is his original name. And I was like, okay, well written in parts. I showed it to some of my journalism students. They're like, why is this guy in the paper? And I was like, well, he is, I guess, trending up or whatever. But the problem here is not so much that you're writing about him, but that you're not producing anything that he doesn't want to read, that anything that doesn't help his celebrity.
Yeah.
And there's been that too. It's not at the level of betrayal that Jonathan Greenblatt did, but just reporters not willing to confront this movement and just sort of like, well, this is the reality now, and that's it. Because you're going to get the threats that I got if you dig deep.
You wrote years ago about how Stephen Miller was promoting VDARE. Now Peter Brimlow's ideology is mainstream. It's fully embraced by not just the Republican Party, but a uniparty government that we have right now. The Republicans are in power. Donald Trump is enacting policies that were exactly Peter Brimlow's wildest dreams that I'm not certain that he believed he would see in his lifetime. What do we do with a Republican Party that is so closely aligned with VDARE?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to emphasize that, and I think you did that at the beginning, but I want to emphasize it now before talking about VDARE. The Strange People on the Hill is not about VDARE as much as it's about the impact of our extremist politics on the psychology of everyday people. Mm-hmm. That's the main focus of that. And that leads into what you're talking about, because VDARE ostensibly doesn't exist. It has a Twitter account now, and Peter still writes up a few lines on Substack when he can get around to it. But Peter Brimlow, that's the founder. For folks who don't know, I shouldn't speak as if everybody has the same knowledge base as Kris does. But the trajectory of VDARE is documented in this book. And he wrote this book called Alien Nation in 1995, which became a touchstone book for white nationalists, neo-Nazis, anti-immigrant, nativists, all, the whole collection of people that would have been on the outside of MAGA in 2016 are now on the inside of MAGA in many ways. And, it's really a fascinating thing, because when it comes out, David Frum is like one of the people who writes a blurb or a good review for it. The New York Times gives it a good review, and it takes a while for people to realize that actually this book is very racist, and it's really focused on kind of cleaning out the country of non-white immigration is like the way its emphasis. He really talks about Hart Celler, which is in the 1960s, opened up the world to immigration from the Middle East and from Africa and various other places. My own existence is happened as a result of Hart Celler. My mother came in from Egypt in 1968, and my father is white, very white. And Brimlow, once he runs into these accusations of racism, it gets very difficult for him. He's in the, during the W. Bush years, he's really an outsider, but he's full of vigor and he's always, anytime he can get a microphone, he wants to talk about it. And he's pushing from the outside to like, hey, start talking about non-white immigration. This is the most important thing. Make this party focus on whites. This is a party that you are totally missing the boat when you go, if you're George Bush, and you go and, and you're like on the campaign trail and you're talking in Spanish, you are completely missing the point here. This is, you're signing your own death wish. What we need to be focusing on is there are whites in all these places. You need to max out the white vote, cater to whites, and start focusing on getting non-white immigrants out of this country more and more. again, there's a racist backlash to Obama. He continues to push from the outside. He, like many other people like him in the movement, are shocked out of their minds when Trump begins to parrot almost everything that they want. And in fact, Ann Coulter, a lot of people think of Ann Coulter almost as like a more mainstream conservative figure, even though I'd be like, she's so awful and stuff like that. Yeah, she was actually contributing to VDARE, like scores of pieces. If you go and search on, the old archives, she was writing quite a bit on them. So was Pat Buchanan. So Trump picks up her book, Adios America, and he kind of forms the basis of his build the wall nonsense that he was picking in 2016. They can't believe this is happening. And they can't believe when he wins, as many of us can't believe. Right? Everybody's stunned. VDARE is riding really, really high. They get these dark money donations to help buy this castle, which is, where the book starts. And then, interestingly enough, and we get for the factors why VDARE falls apart, but they fall apart around the same time that in the 2024 RNC, and this gets to the where your question was before. I remember I stayed offline because I was also recovering. I was at a psychiatric hospital for 3 weeks, which we can talk about. But I had a rough go, and so partly due to the threats, partly due to the stuff around SPLC, Gaza, that sort of thing. And I was focused on recovery and the book. I stayed offline, but I did tune in for the 2024 RNC, and I remember seeing this old white woman, late 60s, early 70s, in a wheelchair, holding a sign that said "Mass deportations now." Right?
Yeah.
And I was like, all these random people. I saw people of color holding a sign that says "Mass deportations now," and I said, "What? Not even in my own." I see Trump up in the polls, and I see them waving the signs of mass deportation now. I said, Jesus Christ, man, that's crazy. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. I can't believe we're there. But it's fascinating in the context of this story, at least in the book, that you have VDARE and this great replacement focus group, and they fighting from the outside forever. And just as they are falling apart, their vision of the Republican Party is essentially realized. And I think like a lot of the people, there's no solidarity in the fascist right. They don't care about one another. When Peter Brimelow passes away, he's in his late 70s now, the only people going to be talking about him are us. There'll be a few posts on X, and then off they go. They don't care. Mm-hmm. They really do. They're just like, move on, next. It is fascinating to me that all these people fought for this moment, and they're all kind of almost forgotten. They're almost insignificant. Jared Taylor, who is American Renaissance, the white supremacist website, I think even more explicitly white supremacist than VDARE, in my opinion, because they're like really love the race science, and that one. Yeah, it is something, and it's like Stephen Miller and his fixation with VDARE is part of it, but it's also has to do with Fox News and just the gradual mutation of the Republican Party.
What's going to happen to the Andrew Torbas and the Gab? For people who don't know, a lot of people have never heard of Gab. It's like a cross between Facebook and Twitter, and it was made and Torba, the founder, this like racist neo-Nazi sympathizer, he used to kind of joke, but it was kind of true, in that he was inspired to create it because people who use Twitter used to say, oh, if you don't like the rules, go make your own. Yes. And he did. What is the future of extremist platforms like Gab? Does Andrew Torba, is he even relevant anymore now that Elon Musk owns X?
The euphemistic term for that used to be alt tech. We're doing alt tech. I have like some stories you may not know. I don't know because we didn't know each other then. But like, I really made the beginnings of like when the Southern Poverty Law Center hired me and all that stuff. The beginnings of me getting known by the movement and getting known for where I would break stories was on Gab. I was one of the first. I was like I think I was the first reporter, like non-Gab normal reporter, verified on Gab. They gave me a verified account, and they wanted to show that they were normal by giving me one. This is when I was at Newsweek.
Mm-hmm.
And Newsweek didn't give me a budget. Like, they didn't give me a budget to travel. So Chris Mathias would go and like cover this rally or whatever, and I'd have to cover everything from the newsroom because they didn't have any money in Newsweek. And so I made like one thing I made was like sort of OSINT. That's how I got good at that, because I had to like make stories like with the computer. And then the other thing is I would build sources on Gab. I would just go and butt heads with these guys, and they would, we would go over long stretches like that, just going back and forth. Just a quick story about Torba. I had some really bad threats through Gab, like crazy. One person who threatened me is Robert Bowers, the man who carried out the terror attack in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 2018, October 27, 2018. My dates are usually pretty good. We'll see if that one double checks, but end of October 2018. And when Bowers carried out that terror attack, and somebody's like, "Oh my God, this is turning." And I went to Gab, and I was like, "Oh my God, I know this guy. I know this guy because he's been in there. Be like, we'll get you. We're gonna do this." I was like, "Oh my God!" It was like so scary because like, then you learn that the people you're conversing with are actually like really violent.
Yep.
In the middle of all this, while I was getting all these threats, I DM'd Torba. It was a small pond. Like you do a post on Gab and like everybody would see it because there was only like 500 people and they were all extremists. So I DM'd Torba on Gab and I was like, "Listen, I'm getting you got to do something. You got to like, I'm on here. I'm talking with these people. You have got to get these threats, together. I'm getting threats to my parents' house. My parents have cameras around their house. You need to like step it up a little bit because like, it's one thing. I'm happy to be the kind of Washington Generals here to your Harlem Globetrotters. You guys are enjoying. I'm the bad guy. I'm the antagonist. That's okay. But like, I'm not getting killed here." And Torba, rather than say like, "Look, okay, let me see what I can do," or like just being like, "Listen, this is the site. If you don't like it, leave." He screenshots my thing and posts it onto Gab as an invitation for more threats. Essentially,
I remember that.
Yeah, and you do. Yeah. And Chris Cantwell, who there's a guy,
the crying Nazi.
Yeah, who has had a very a difficult life. That was a lot of self-imposed difficulty in Chris Cantwell's life. He was like, "We gotta go put some masks on and go to his parents' house," or some shit like that. I couldn't remember. It was crazy. But that's the kind of guy Torba is. Like, I saw everything I needed to know from that guy. You always tell, like, because you go to these like human to human on these things. Like I've had extremists be like, listen, do not mention this family member. Don't do this like in this piece. And I take it seriously. I'll be like, okay, all right. If it doesn't, I'm not going to like compromise my story for somebody, but like, I can tell when somebody is saying like, this is going to be like a red line for me, like, emotion. I can't deal with this.
Yeah.
If it's not, if it doesn't further the story better, I'll take it out. For him to do that publicly, what a terrible guy. So the answer to your question is, I don't know. What could he possibly do now? He was offering the world, this guy, he was offering these people like a, he was like this is a place where you go where you won't get suspended. You can say whatever you want. You can say kind of anti-Semitic nonsense you want. I don't care. I'm anti-Semitic too. He wouldn't say that, but he is anti-Semitic. I'll say like whatever, any kind of thing. What does he offer the world that Grok and X? Elon Musk is doing that. Elon Musk is doing that, but with the budget of a guy who owns Tesla and SpaceX, right? We're all in Gab if you own an account, still own an account there. I mean, I just use it mostly for research now. But like, yeah, I mean, all tech doesn't make any sense. It's in fact, all of us, I think, it's us against tech in many ways. Because if you look at all, he's the least of our concern. He's just like another extremist, Torba. If you look at like when Trump was inaugurated in January of 2024, there were all these like tech guys like there to kiss the ring, if you recall. It was Bezos and it was Musk and was Zuckerberg there too. It was like a united front of these people. So as far as I'm concerned, it's all of us against these people now. It's not that we don't we can keep using the tech. We can still log into Instagram if you want. And if you're using it for good, that's great. But we should never forget how they aligned themselves on that date. And if this goes very, very badly, and fascism implodes in this country, and I'm confident that we will beat them back slowly but surely, we should never forget where they were on that day, those people.
What do we do after that? After Trump leaves office, whether McDonald's gets him or voters get him, he's going to leave office someday. He's not going to live forever.
Yeah.
What do we do with these tech giants who align themselves so happily with a fascist president, and who, while doing that, have also really empowered all sorts of domestic extremists? I mean, Elon Musk is the worst, but Mark Zuckerberg, Peter Thiel,
there's the guy.
There's a whole spectrum of these really fucking powerful billionaires who I don't think it's stretching the imagination too much to say that part of the reason Elon Musk is trying to get an autonomous robot in everyone's house is because he wants an autonomous robot army that he can switch on.
Yeah.
Like we've seen him play war, shutting the internet on and off in Ukraine and Russia. I think he genuinely enjoys the idea of being a galactic warlord. That is who Elon Musk is.
Well, yeah. Well, I think Bob Silverman has a feature out in Wired, him and I think Noah Shackman, about how James Dolan has this has this kind of almost, he's developed this sort of private security force, this kind of spy thing that he's created. I mean, these people have unthinkable amounts of money. Mm-hmm. I guess the short answer to your question, because I keep giving long answers, but I'll give a short one for this, which is, the title of the film, one battle after another. I think for now it's one battle at a time. I don't think there's anything we can really do to tech right now. I think the main thing is we gotta flush MAGA down the toilet. We gotta make this it's just not enough to say we got some Democrats in power, because they did that in 2020, and look how that went. We had 3 consecutive Trump terms. Let's be honest, right? Mm-hmm. Trump was the dominant figure, and that the Strange People on the Hill covers those Biden years. It's basically the late 2019 to the day after the election in 2024, a 5-year period between those things, and Trump was the dominant force. He was a dominant figure at that time. Biden was, we all knew that it was a tenuous thing. It felt tenuous throughout most of it. Did not feel strong. We need to beat back MAGA, and we have to create a stigma around MAGA that lasts, that make people feel I don't want to celebrate this. This was a bad time. This is a dark moment in our history. And then if we can successfully do that, then I think it's time to take on tech in a more force. That doesn't mean you just totally ignore it. Keep reporting on it. If there are any actions that people have that are worth supporting, support it. But I think the target now has to be like, we gotta beat this fascist strain in our culture back. It is a fascist movement. There's no question in my mind. I don't think that's hyperbole. I've spent a lot of time looking at different fascist movements and that sort of thing. And I understand that not every person who voted for Trump is a fascist, but the movement itself is fascist. Mm-hmm. It is taken over the Republican Party. It's fascist. It's got to beat it back badly. It's got to be beat. And if you look, a lot of the problems, Kris, I think we have culturally, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but curious to share your thoughts. During Reconstruction, like, the Confederacy was defeated, but then we just let it like seep in back in, like, like in the T-1000 or whatever in Terminator 2, where it like comes in solid and then it gets melted and then it starts moving through the cracks. It's like, the Confederacy was destroyed, but then it kind of went in like almost like a vapor, into society and integrated itself everywhere. It was a huge failure, I think. And I think a lot, I don't know if you agree with this, but I view I don't think we would have, it's impossible to imagine that all of American history without, they're talking about 100 plus years, but not putting that to bed properly. Yep. Open the door for MAGA. We need to put this stuff to bed. We have to demand that people be better than this. This is insane. What Trump is what happened in Minneapolis, executing those people, and they're never going to face any kind of trial. That's insane. That's not a country any of us want to live in. That's not the leader of the free world by any means. I mean, that is. It's primitive beyond being fascist. So that's first.
I think you're entirely right. I mean, my obsession is justice, and you don't get justice just from winning an election. You get just like, I want restorative justice. I want to see the people who've been, the Trump family has turned the federal government into a money making enterprise for them. Like, I want to see us taxpayers, citizens, voters, I want to see us recoup some of our losses in whatever way that we can, monetarily and otherwise. I want to see people pay a price personally, professionally, and maybe even taking away their liberty because of what they have imposed on all of us. And that, that's not just the domestic extremists running around, doing hate crimes, in the name of Patriot Front. It's the domestic extremists running around doing hate crimes in the name of ICE. Yeah. Like those foot soldiers need to pay a price as well.
To be a fascist, and, some people are truly racist. I would argue that Peter Brimlow, who is the specter that hangs over Berkeley Springs, is a racist man. Mm-hmm. One example of that is that he talked about he after the Tops shooting where the guy extremist, great replacement focused extremist shot and killed 10 black people
in
Buffalo. He posted something that was like, I condemn shooting, but Buffalo does have a problem with the great replacement. I mean, imagine that to me is, I know what you're about. I try to be as charitable as possible. Mm-hmm. So he's a racist. I would argue that Stephen Miller is a racist man. Trump, we've seen the Central Park Five, lots of different things. But then some of these people who are just grifting off their crypto and all that stuff, they may be racist by convenience. They're maybe willing to go along with it just to enrich themselves, just to bring themselves closer to the proverbial tit of this cash cow of MAGA and stuff like that. I think absolutely taking some of that money back is a good step towards restoring it. These things are related. It's not like it's not like the killings in Minneapolis. It's not like Alligator Alcatraz. It's all that stuff is separate from the crypto grifting and that sort of thing. It's part of the same thing, you know. And people just with wild greed, no sense of spirituality, no sense of the life being meaning anything more than what you can accumulate here in the present. We need to, I think, absolutely restore some of that theft back to people.
Mm-hmm. You and I kind of went quiet around the same time, which I think maybe some of our colleagues might have figured out after the fact. December of 2023, you had a panic attack that you write about in your book. That was really severe. You collapsed in the shower. Your wife had to pull you out of it.
Yeah.
At that time, I became, I mean, I was running my own organizations, but I became what would have been unemployable if I wasn't employing myself. I hadn't paid myself in months because I've been paying my staff out of pocket, and I was wrecked for months.
Yeah.
I was completely useless. I ended up doing an intensive outpatient thing in May of 24, and still spent months where I couldn't work full time because I was just couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't do anything anymore. How are you doing today?
Yeah.
With the, it's, I know that writing the book was a struggle. Writing a book always is a struggle, but you're writing about.
I enjoyed it though. It wasn't that bad.
Good. That's
I
good
love
to
writing,
hear.
but, you know.
That's good to hear. So now that you're talking about all this stuff again, you've got your own podcast where you're talking about posting through it, aptly named. How are you doing today? You've got the book. You're traveling. You're doing press. I thank you for coming on my little podcast. But you've got some real press. I
want you on mine.
So how are you doing?
Well, I'm doing a lot better, Kris. Thank you for asking. The timeline of it, of what you mentioned, I think I just want to tease out for a second. Some of it, what I went through, we had already talked about earlier about the state of the threats and how that impacted me. But it was really like the Southern Poverty Law Center more than anything else that really messed me up, because when we were unable to produce work because we were getting this downward pressure from above, I became a union steward, and I faced tremendous retaliation by taking steps to try to organize that shop. And if you've never experienced workplace retaliation as a union steward or something like that, like, be happy. It sucks. Like, I was called into all these kind of like weird disciplinary meetings where they were giving me quotes I didn't say. I mean, it was like Kafkaesque stuff. And that's when I had the panic attack. I had the panic attack. I had gotten a fresh wave of threats. You know what I'm talking about? Like, they come and go, right? It's almost like a herpes outbreak, or chickenpox turns to shingles later.
We're all the flavor of the week once in a while.
Yeah, we're just it just comes up, and I had this like horrific wave of threats at the same time that the retaliation was coming up. I had a panic attack, collapsed in the shower. Then Gaza happened, and my mother's side is Egyptian and with Palestinian roots, and they're Arab Christian. I always thought of myself as culturally white. My last name's Hayden, right? So I didn't really think much about it, but it brought up a lot of emotional urgency, and again, about the Arab Christian part of it, there was a church, that was there. It was like bombed. Everybody was killed inside. And these type of things were very difficult. My family was going through it on the family chat. Like, we were I mean, that was on top of everything else. So in November, Hannah Gase was like, hey, this is a petition for writers. Speak out against Gaza, call what's happening in Gaza, call for a ceasefire. And it mentions that Israel is an apartheid state, which it literally is. Mm-hmm. And I signed it, and Hannah signed it, which we had a right to do in our contract. But after that happened, about 2 weeks later, Washington Free Beacon had a Zionist blogger who was conservative, wrote like a thing that was like SPLC spokesperson, blames Israel for Hamas violence. And the picture they used was like, Cobra from G.I. Joe, like the whole rap there with like the rocket launcher and all that stuff. And I was like, damn, that's the picture that they're using of me. I mean, that's not me. Right. I was like, so basically they're conflating me with Hamas. Mm-hmm. Okay, I got mad when I saw it. I said, hey, you didn't reach out for me a comment, back and forth. They put an extra little thing at the bottom that was like, I stated like, hey, I've spent a lot of my career fighting anti-Semites, almost getting killed for it, quite frankly. In fact, anti-Semites in particular are the ones that gave me the most amount of threats. That being said, SPLC disciplined me for that and didn't discipline Hannah, which is a Title VII violation. Mm-hmm. Discrimination because I'm Arab, she's Jewish. You'd be one, not the other, for signing the thing. That's a huge problem for them. And that really shook me up, and I had to go through all these lawyers and stuff like that. I couldn't believe it was happening. It was an extension of the union fight, but also I think there's unconscious bias when you see somebody who is like, this is the union leader, and you see him depicted as Hamas and he's Arab. There is an unconscious bias of like, bad, go away, this type of stuff, which is ironic because actually my parents fled Egypt in part because of Islamic extremism targeting Christian homes, which is some irony there. And that really impacted me hugely. And it was like, that took it to a different level because I'd never experienced like discrimination before. And when in December, I was, I went inside the VDARE castle with Hannah, and we ran into Peter Brimlow, and all that's written out in the book. You can see it's one of my favorite scenes in the book.
Is this the Christmas party?
Yes, it's a Christmas party. And after it was over, he publicly accused me of being a pedophile and trying to get access to, what they do. This is what they do, yeah. Right? It's like, I will tell you this right now. The last people I didn't name them. I didn't want is his children. I don't want anything to do with this man's children. I have children of my own. That is a no-go. They didn't do anything. And I hope that his children grow up to be anti-fascists, and reject his ideology entirely. And probably odds are that one of them might, one of the three, when that happened, SPLC were like, did you try to accost his daughter and stuff? They were just they were in just panic mode themselves because they know they've done the discrimination. We're looking to try to find a legitimate thing I had done wrong. And I started to have suicidal ideations. And I say that like trigger warning, but if you want to contact me, if you're going through anything, that's the way I do it whenever I talk about this, because I know it can be difficult for people. Come talk to me. I've been through it. So I had a really rough go. And then I called for a family leave type of situation. And when I did that, that's when SPLC terminated my contract, which is like they violated, like, first you had the retaliation, the discrimination, and then that. They had like 3 things that would have made this an illegal firing by my lawyer's estimation. And I threatened suit. I got a settlement, and I spent all of 2024 offline, which is when you and I talked. I think we had a nice talk. I was down in Florida with my uncle at the time, and we had a nice, just to catch up. And I will tell you, even from since that time we had that conversation when I was in Florida, you and I'm doing a lot better, man. I gotta say, like, it's the podcast has been awesome. That's been great. Jared and I, it's been really doing well. That's one thing. I think the book is. I'll let people be the judge. I think it's a literary achievement of some kind. So,
I think so.
Thank you. And I've always been a writer first and foremost. Not before I ever did any kind of anti-fascist work or any of that stuff. And also, I got to say, I'm in a weird way, Kris, I'm optimistic. Somebody mentioned to me today, it's like, oh my God, when the book comes out, are they going to try to kill you again and all this stuff? And, these guys ops, the kids use the phrase op, like in hip hop, it's like, it's my op, it's like, I'm going to this is my enemy. If I see my op, it's on site, right? Their ops now are not me. They're not me. They're each other. They're trying to kill each other right now. And I'm sickened by what's happened to our country. The stuff that happened in Minneapolis was I don't think since Heather Heyer has affected me, as deeply. There's been a lot of stuff, but it's just Alex Preddy reminded me so much of my friend JT, who I used to do theater with. He's also got into nursing, and it was just one of those guys that could do good. Try to help people type guy. And it just looked like him when I heard him. It was just exactly, him. And I was like, this guy, it was personal. I felt very personal, even though I didn't know him. Horrible. What's happening in the country is horrible. But watching the infighting and seeing them struggle to keep this thing afloat makes me feel like we can do something, the type of things that we couldn't have dreamt of before MAGA. Mm-hmm. Maybe, I see the way my normie parents talk about the country. People are fed up with this shit. And, I am optimistic that on the other side of this, we have a chance to maybe reclaim this country and stand up for something decent. Give us a country that we can be proud of. It may take a long time. I may not even see it in my lifetime, but I have some optimism I didn't have at the time I went into hospital for those 3 weeks.
That's really good to hear. And I agree with your prognosis. I would not be doing this if I didn't have hope. The reason that we fight is because we are still convinced, even if we're maybe a little delusional, that we can win, and that'll be worth it in the end. And with that, the same thing I ask every one of my guests. What can the people listening to this podcast, the overwhelming majority of whom are normies, what can they do to go on offense to fight for our democracy?
Well, I think I'm going to give a good answer here. If you look at the people and strange people on the Hill, the people who live in Berkeley Springs, the one thing that I would use to describe them is relentless. Means that if you do something that is off, if you do an action that doesn't go anywhere, do the next action. Because they were, think about the absolute impossibility of a situation that they were presented with. VDARE bought a private residence, a castle, a private office, or whatever they turned that into. What can you even do? It's private. You can't kick them. You can't move somebody out of their office or their home. But they tried so many different things, big and small. Some of them would have been cringe, but they did it anyway. Mm-hmm. Among other things, they were lobbying the New York State Attorney General's office to pay attention to VDARE. They brought me in. I wrote an article that helped them. They said, "Did you see this article? Did you see this article?" They made the article happen by bringing me. They sent it to the New York Attorney General's office. Then the New York Attorney General's office opened an investigation into VDARE. It took years. They did everything. VDARE did a conference at the castle. And then down below, they held this kind of Immigration Heritage Day, at the same time with all these flags from different things and people a few stands where a few people are handing out like cookies from different countries. I mean, there was like 8 people there when I went. It wasn't much, but it was, the point is, it's like, is just keep going, you know? It is a relentlessness that you just cannot stop and look back and say like, oh, I did this and that was my thing. I don't want to give people's personal health details out, but I will say that there is a longtime anti-fascist researcher who is a wonderful, wonderful person to me, and she is dying of cancer right now. And I just went to go see her. I don't think she has a ton of time left. I hope that's not true, but I mean, she's, you know, it's not going to, she has stage 4 lung cancer. And she, right before I left, you know, she looked at me and she said, pay attention to everything, which I thought was 3 words to say a lot, you know. Mm-hmm. That's a lot. I that's something that reverberated for a very long time. And it's like, when you're in that position where you don't have a lot of time left, you can be very precise. So pay attention to everything and don't stop. That would be my answer.
Well, thank you, Mike.
Hey, Kris.
Really appreciate the time. And
we're gonna get you on posting through it, because Jared and I have already talked about it. So we just got to figure out the right topic. If you got one, send it to us, and we're gonna do it.
Just let me know when.
Right.
So before I let you go, please let folks know where they can find your Substack, where they can find your podcast, how they can get your book.
Yeah.
And anything else you need to pitch.
Well, Strange People on the Hill is the name of the book. My name is Michael Edison Hayden. You can find it online all over the place. If you don't want to get it from Amazon, you can get it from Hachette Publishing directly. They'll send it to you. So there's that. And I'm on Blue Sky at Michael Edison Hayden. You can find me. It's got a little blue check, just like I used to have on the old Twitter. So we're doing our best over there to keep it like it was. And where my Substack is Extreme Measures, I will periodically post there. I think a whole bunch of people followed after I wrote a thing about SPLC. It got a lot of views, so maybe I will cash in on that by writing some other stuff.
You should keep it up. I mean,
I will.
You like writing. So.
I love it. Every time I start one, I'm like, should I sell it to a publication first? But I'm going to do. I think next week I'll write something, actually, if I can.
Cool.
All right, Kris, that was awesome. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, brother. The people that Mike writes about in his book, the ones who fought and pushed back when hate came to their hometown, they're everyday folks just like you. You don't have to be a professional Nazi hunter, an extremism expert to make hate unwelcome in your neighborhood. You just have to know what to look for and how to shed light on it when you see it. The vast majority of people in Berkeley Springs had never heard of VDARE before they bought that castle. But one person did, and they sent a tip to the SPLC. And that's what kicked off Mike's investigation and brought national attention to a malignant cancer growing in a small town. You don't need to be the reporter, the investigator, or the person publicly exposing or fighting against hate groups. Knowing enough to send a tip to the experts, that's enough to make a difference. But to keep these experts in the fight, they need support. That means sharing their work, amplifying their reporting, supporting them financially if you're able. I've included links to all of Michael Edison Hayden's work in the show notes so that you can support him directly if you hope to. But beyond supporting the experts, it also means building something where you are. Because the same way that these movements operate locally, so can we. If you haven't yet, visit my nonprofit's website, veteransfightingfascism.org, and look for the Anti-Fascist Book Club guides. I've written all of the materials necessary for you to not just to learn more about extremism, but how to organize to fight it. Add Mike's book, Strange People on the Hill, to your reading list. And if you're new here, make sure you're subscribed to this show wherever you get your podcasts. Watch it on Valor Media Network on YouTube, and check out On Offense on Substack if you want to get everything that I write directly to your inbox. On Offense is produced by Gina Kim and edited by the Lombardos for Valor Media Network. I'm Kris Goldsmith, and I'll see you next time.